It was an unusually warm spring morning, the kind of day that whispered promises of new beginnings. The sun had barely crested over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the countryside. The light flickered across the tall grasses, stirring them gently in the early breeze. Everything about this morning seemed perfect, almost too perfect. Sophia Hawkins, a little girl of only 6, sat quietly in her wheelchair, the soft hum of the wind the only thing breaking the silence. Her small fingers tightened on the armrests as she peered out at the world around her, trying to grasp the fleeting peace she had come to know over the last few years. She had learned to live within the confines of her chair, her life always seen through the lens of limited movement, but not of limited hope. Her father, Daniel Hawkins, tall and impeccably dressed, pushed the chair slowly down the dirt path that led toward the cliffs, his expression unreadable. He was the kind of man whose wealth masked his cruelty, a man who carried his power like a shield, hiding the darkness beneath his polished surface. Sophia had always known that her father's attention came with a price, but today, for some reason, she was hopeful. He had promised her a special outing, something to make up for the days spent inside, confined by her wheelchair. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Sophia's voice was small, hesitant. She had learned long ago to tread carefully around her father's moods, to make herself as invisible as possible. His silence had always been louder than words, and today that silence was almost deafening. "We're going to see the sunrise from the bluff," Daniel replied, his voice flat and distant. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed straight ahead. His steps were precise, deliberate. He seemed unaffected by the world around him, the birds singing, the warmth of the sun on his face. For him, it was just another day, another chore to be done. Sophia's heart fluttered nervously in her chest. She had always loved the idea of watching the sunrise, of seeing the world bathe in golden light the way her mother used to describe it. But now, there was something different in the air, something that made her skin prickle with unease. Snowy, the family's white horse, stood in the distance, grazing near the stables. His mane was windswept, and as always he had an alert, watchful expression. Sophia's heart warmed at the sight of him. Snowy had always been her protector, her confidant, and in many ways her only true friend. Whenever she felt small, when the world seemed too much to bear, Snowy was there, calm and steadfast. "Daddy," Sophia murmured, her voice shaking slightly, "Snowy's watching us." Daniel paused for a moment, but only for a brief second. "It's fine," he said, his tone dismissive. "Let him watch, he's just a horse." But Sophia wasn't so sure. Snowy had always been different. He wasn't just a horse. He was something more, something that Sophia couldn't explain. And right now, he seemed worried. As they neared the edge of the cliff, the view before them became more dramatic, more intense. The bluffs dropped sharply into the valley below, the jagged rocks and crashing waves below a stark reminder of nature's power. It was both breathtaking and terrifying at the same time. Sophia's hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair tighter. She could feel her heart beginning to race. The edge of the cliff seemed closer now, the earth beneath her suddenly feeling fragile, ready to give way. "Daddy," she whispered, a lump forming in her throat. "I don't like this." Daniel didn't respond. His face remained hard, his gaze distant. Sophia noticed the tightness of his jaw, the way his hands clenched on the wheelchair's handles. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her, as though she wasn't even there. Just as they reached the edge, Sophia felt a sudden lurch in her stomach. Something was terribly wrong. She could feel it deep inside her, a cold, sick feeling that threatened to consume her. "Daddy, please." "I'm scared," she pleaded, her voice trembling. Her father stopped the wheelchair, his gaze finally meeting hers. There was no warmth in his eyes, only cold calculation. "You're a burden, Sophia," he said quietly, his voice laced with bitterness. "You've always been a burden. I thought I could deal with it, but I can't anymore." Sophia's eyes widened. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Before she could react, Daniel's hands pushed her forward. The wheelchair tilted, and in that split second she realized what was happening. "Daddy, no!" she screamed, panic flooding her chest. Her hands gripped the chair's arms, but it was too late. Snowy, who had been grazing in the distance, lifted his head sharply, his ears flicking toward the scene. In that moment he recognized the danger. He knew what was happening. With a thunderous cry, Snowy bolted, galloping toward the cliff with all his might. His hooves pounded against the earth, each stride more desperate than the last. But it was too late. Sophia's scream was swallowed by the wind as the wheelchair tumbled over the edge of the cliff. Time seemed to stretch in an agonizing slow motion as she fell, her heart racing, her breath stolen by the terror that gripped her. And then, everything went black. The world came crashing back in a rush of pain, the sharp sting of the cold wind and the unbearable weight of her body pressing against the rocks. Sophia gasped for air, her chest heaving as her hands instinctively grasped the cold metal of the wheelchair's arms. For a moment she thought she might be dreaming, that somehow she would wake up in her room, safe and warm. But the reality hit her all at once. The dizziness, the nausea, the stinging pain in her limbs. And she realized she wasn't dreaming. She was alive. But just barely. Sophia's heart pounded painfully in her chest as she blinked, trying to clear her vision. Her head felt heavy, the world spinning around her as the vast emptiness of the cliff surrounded her. She was wedged between jagged rocks, her wheelchair lodged tightly against the rough outcrop, the seatbelt still strapped across her waist. It was a miracle, an inexplicable twist of fate, that she hadn't plummeted to the valley below. Her arms were scraped and bleeding, and her fingers ached from gripping the wheelchair so tightly as it rattled against the rocks. The fall had been terrifying, an unstoppable drop into nothingness, but somehow the chair had found purchase among the gnarled branches and stones, halting her fall just in time. She could still feel the rush of air against her skin, the terror of knowing that at any moment it could all be over. But Sophia wasn't done yet. She had to keep fighting. Her mother's words echoed in her mind like a soft, comforting whisper. "You're stronger than you think, Sophia. You'll always find a way." Sophia clung to that thought as her breathing slowed, fighting back tears. She couldn't afford to break down, not now, not here. The sun was setting behind the distant hills, the golden light dimming as the clouds gathered ominously on the horizon. The wind howled, carrying the scent of rain, but it was the eerie stillness that unnerved Sophia the most. She was alone, except for Snowy. She could hear the soft sound of his hooves echoing above her, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. Snowy's whinnies rang out, anxious and powerful, reaching her from the top of the cliff. His cry pierced through the cold silence, and Sophia's heart swelled with a mixture of fear and relief. Snowy was here. "Don't leave me," she whispered to herself, trying to quiet the panic rising in her chest. The horse's calls were frantic, more urgent now, as if he sensed the peril she was in. His instinct was the only thing that kept her grounded, reminding her that she was not truly alone in this dark moment. Snowy would find a way to save her. He always had. Sophia shut her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek as the familiar sound of the horse's hooves grew louder, closer. She held on to that thought, her only anchor in the suffocating emptiness. Snowy wouldn't leave her. He never had before. But as the darkness pressed in, she could feel the weight of the situation. She had no way of getting out on her own. The cliff was too steep, the rocks too sharp, and the chair too broken, and she could feel the pain in her limbs growing worse with each passing second. I need help, she thought desperately, but there was no one around. No one could hear her cries. It wasn't long before the low rumble of hooves and the sharp sound of a neigh broke through the sound of the wind. Snowy had finally reached the edge of the cliff. She could feel the ground shake beneath her as he stomped impatiently, refusing to leave. He was standing at the very top, his figure a silhouette against the waning light. His white coat gleamed in the darkness, his hooves scraping against the ground as he paced back and forth. Sophia could hear him calling to her, his whinnies now full of urgency. She wasn't sure how long she had been sitting there, but the desperation in his calls made it feel like an eternity. "Snowy," she whispered weakly, lifting her hand toward the sky as if somehow she could reach him, as if somehow he could hear her. "Please, please help me." She didn't know how, but she knew Snowy would. He always did. Snowy had a way of understanding her like no one else. In the years she'd spent with him, she had felt the connection between them deepen, a bond formed through unspoken trust and shared love. He was more than just a horse. He was her guardian, her protector, and right now, he was her only hope. She tried to call out to him, but her throat was dry, her voice hoarse. The words barely escaped her lips, and all she could manage was a whisper. She could feel herself slipping, the edges of her consciousness starting to blur. "Please," she gasped, clutching the chair tighter as another wave of pain and dizziness overtook her. Her vision was blurry now, her thoughts scattered, and for a moment she feared she might lose consciousness entirely. But then, through the haze, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of Snowy's hooves as he galloped toward her. His powerful strides sent vibrations through the earth, and Sophia's heart leaped in her chest. The sound of his hooves grew louder as he approached, his form emerging out of the shadows like a ghost in the night. Snowy reached the edge of the cliff, his white coat a beacon in the growing darkness. He stopped at the brink, looking down at her with those intelligent eyes, filled with a fierce protectiveness. The wind whipped his mane wildly, but he didn't flinch. He was still, steady, as if nothing else mattered but Sophia's safety. Sophia's eyes fluttered open at the sound of Snowy's soft neigh. Her heart swelled with relief, and though she could barely move, she reached out her trembling hand toward him. Snowy lowered his head, sniffing the air, and then, in an act of pure instinct, he pawed at the ground. His hooves dug into the dirt as he searched for a way to help her. The ground trembled beneath his powerful legs, and for a moment, Sophia thought she might feel the earth give way. But Snowy stood firm, his gaze never leaving her. Sophia's tears mixed with the rain as she watched him, her protector. She wanted to call out to him, to tell him she was okay, but the words wouldn't come. She was too weak, too tired. But Snowy understood. She could feel his presence above her, strong and unwavering. And in that moment she knew, no matter what, Snowy would never leave her. Jack Miller had worked at the Montgomery estate for 23 years, but he had never seen Snowy act this way. Normally a calm and obedient horse, Snowy was now pacing restlessly in the stable, his head turning anxiously towards the horizon. His ears were perked up, his body tense. The old ranch foreman, Jack, knew every animal on the estate and had a particular bond with the horses, especially Snowy. But something was wrong. Very wrong. He glanced at the horse, watching as Snowy snorted loudly, then stamped his hooves impatiently. The animal was nearly frantic, something that had never happened before. "Easy there, boy," Jack murmured, walking cautiously toward the stall. Snowy was pushing against the door, pawing at the ground with increasing urgency. Jack had worked with Snowy for years, but today was different. The animal wasn't his usual calm self. There was a sense of foreboding in his every movement. Jack reached out, his fingers brushing the horse's mane, and Snowy turned his head to look at him. Jack was startled by the intensity in Snowy's dark eyes. It was as though the horse was trying to communicate something. Jack had seen that look before, an understanding that went beyond normal animal behavior. It was the kind of connection that Jack only saw with the rarest of creatures, and in that moment, he knew Snowy was trying to tell him something. Then, just as quickly as it had started, Snowy stopped pacing and stood still, his head lifted, eyes scanning the distant bluffs. Jack followed Snowy's gaze. It was the cliff, the place where Daniel often took his daughter, Sophia. Jack frowned, his instincts kicking in. He hadn't seen Sophia that morning, which was strange. She was usually in the stables, talking to Snowy or spending time with him before breakfast. But today, she hadn't come by. Jack knew that something wasn't right, and Snowy's unusual behavior confirmed it. Without another thought, Jack turned and rushed out of the barn, following Snowy's lead as the horse trotted quickly towards the edge of the property. Snowy's hooves clattered on the dirt path, and Jack followed, his heart racing as a sense of urgency overtook him. As they neared the cliff's edge, the storm clouds above began to gather, darkening the sky. The wind picked up, howling and chilling the air, but Jack wasn't concerned with the weather. His eyes were focused on the trail ahead, scanning the ground for any signs of what had happened to Sophia. It didn't take long for Jack to notice the faint tracks in the dirt, small indentations left by Sophia's wheelchair. The marks led straight towards the cliff. Jack's stomach sank. His pace quickened as he approached the edge, his mind already fearing the worst. There, at the cliff's edge, Jack saw the unmistakable sign of a struggle. The wheelchair's wheels had dug deep into the dirt, and the ground was disturbed. As Jack approached the edge, he could see the faint marks of the chair's path until they abruptly stopped. His heart clenched. He could feel his breath catch in his throat as he crouched down, inspecting the ground more closely. The unmistakable sign of a sharp drop. A steep drop off the edge of the cliff. "Oh, God," Jack whispered, feeling a cold rush of panic. Snowy was at his side now, his head turned towards Jack, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. Jack's chest tightened as he understood what had happened. Sophia had fallen. Somehow, she had fallen from the cliff. Jack stood up, his legs shaking beneath him. Snowy's presence by his side was the only thing that kept him grounded. The horse's urgent whinnies pierced through the air, but Jack didn't have time to listen to Snowy's calls. He needed to move. Jack had been around long enough to know that the situation was dire. He needed help, and fast. He pulled out his phone to call for help, but the signal was weak out here. He swore under his breath and made a decision in that moment. He couldn't waste any more time trying to get through to anyone on the phone. He had to go. He had to rescue her. Without hesitation, Jack turned to Snowy, who had been standing quietly by his side, watching him with steady, intelligent eyes. "Stay with me, Snowy," Jack said urgently. "We're going to find her." Snowy stamped his hooves once, a sign of agreement, and together, Jack and the horse headed toward the steep descent. Jack knew the path well. He had hiked it many times during his years working on the estate. But it had never been so treacherous. The rocks were slippery, and the rain that had begun to fall was only making it worse. They descended slowly, carefully, Jack using every ounce of his experience to navigate the steep slope. Snowy kept pace with him, his hooves digging into the earth, steady and unyielding. As they reached the bottom, Jack's heart nearly stopped. He saw Sophia, her wheelchair wedged between the rocks, the seatbelt still strapped across her waist. She was trembling, her skin pale and streaked with tears. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she was still alive. Jack didn't waste a second. He immediately rushed to her side, kneeling down next to her. His hand reached out to her, and she looked at him, her eyes filled with hope. "Uncle Jack," she whispered, her voice shaky but full of trust. Jack's heart swelled with relief. She was alive. But he couldn't let his guard down yet. The storm was coming fast, and they were still far from safety. "It's okay, Sophia," Jack said gently, his voice calm but firm. "You're going to be okay. We're going to get you out of here." With Snowy standing watch above, Jack quickly unstrapped Sophia from her chair, making sure she was secure in his arms before lifting her carefully. He could feel her weight, fragile but full of determination, as she clung to him. Jack called out to Snowy, his voice filled with urgency. The horse responded immediately, trotting over to where Jack was standing. Snowy lowered his head as if to offer support, his presence a comforting reminder that they were not alone. Sophia clung to Jack as they began the difficult climb back up the cliff. The rain had intensified, and the wind whipped through the air, making every step more treacherous than the last. Jack's muscles burned as he hoisted Sophia higher, but the horse remained with them, never leaving their side. The climb felt endless, but Jack's determination never wavered. He wasn't going to let Sophia down, not again. And as they neared the top, Jack could see the glimmer of the headlights in the distance, signaling that help was on the way. With Snowy leading the way, Jack carried Sophia to safety, her body pressed against his chest, her small form trembling with exhaustion and fear. The storm raged around them, but they had made it. They were going to be okay. Snowy's calming presence never left them, his steadfast loyalty a reminder that no matter how dark the world seemed, there was always light on the horizon. The storm had arrived with a vengeance. The wind howled, the rain falling in sheets, soaking everything in its path. Jack Miller, with Sophia safely in his arms, felt the weight of the world pressing down on him as he carefully made his way back up the cliff. His body ached from the strain, the wind and rain making each step a challenge, but he kept moving, determined to get Sophia to safety. Sophia's small body trembled in his arms, her head resting against his chest. She was exhausted, scared, but she was alive. Jack's heart surged with relief at the thought. Snowy, ever the faithful guardian, trotted alongside them, his white coat gleaming through the storm. The horse's calm presence was a steady reassurance for Jack, and it seemed to ease Sophia's fear as well. "Snowy," Sophia whispered weakly, her small voice barely audible over the howling wind. Jack could feel her shivering in his arms, but her words, despite their fragility, carried a sense of peace. "He's always been there for me. I knew he would come for me. He never gave up." Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "He's your guardian angel, Sophia, always has been." With Snowy by their side, they slowly made their way up the steep incline. The rain was falling so heavily now that Jack could barely see where he was stepping, but Snowy seemed to know exactly where to go, his hooves steady on the slick rocks. Jack trusted the horse implicitly, knowing that, even in the face of the storm, Snowy would guide them to safety. As they reached the top of the cliff, Jack's eyes scanned the horizon. In the distance, he saw the faint lights of a vehicle approaching. Help was on the way. The tension in his chest loosened just a little, but he couldn't afford to relax yet. Not until they were safely away from this cursed cliff. Sophia shifted in his arms, and Jack felt her cling to him more tightly. Her voice, though faint, carried a quiet determination. "Uncle Jack, I'm scared. What if they don't believe me? What if they don't believe Snowy?" Jack looked down at her, his heart aching. Sophia was only 6, but she'd already seen more pain than most adults ever would. "They'll believe you, Sophia. They'll believe us." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "And Snowy will never stop protecting you. You'll never be alone again, I promise." As they reached the top, Jack could see Pete's figure standing nearby, his hands gripping the ropes, ready to help. The climber had stayed behind to ensure their safety during the descent, and Jack felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude towards him. "Pete," Jack called out, his voice hoarse with relief. "Help us get Sophia back to the ranch. We made it. She's safe." Pete's eyes widened when he saw Sophia in Jack's arms, her small body wrapped in a blanket. He quickly moved forward, his face pale with concern. "We need to get her to the ambulance. Now." Jack nodded, his arms aching from holding Sophia, but he didn't let go. Not yet. Not until he knew she was safe. He turned to Snowy, who had stayed by their side the entire time, his presence a silent comfort. "Stay with us, Snowy. I'll make sure she's okay. You've done enough, but I need you to stay close." Snowy nickered softly, his head low as he walked alongside them, his eyes never leaving Sophia. He seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, his protective instinct kicking in once again. Snowy had been Sophia's protector from the very beginning, and it was clear that nothing would change that. Not now, not ever. As they reached the vehicle, Jack handed Sophia over to Pete, who quickly laid her down on the stretcher, ensuring she was safe. The paramedics were already preparing, ready to take her to the hospital. Jack watched, his heart swelling with pride and relief. They had made it. Sophia's hand reached out, grasping Jack's as she was lifted into the vehicle. Her voice was a mere whisper, but it was filled with trust. "Uncle Jack, thank you for saving me, and thanks Snowy." Jack squeezed her hand gently, his throat tight. "You're safe now, Sophia. We're going to get you the help you need. You're not alone." As the paramedics closed the doors to the ambulance, Snowy's head lifted, his gaze following Sophia inside. Jack could see the horse's concern in his eyes, the deep bond that had formed between the two of them over the years. Snowy wasn't just an animal to Sophia, he was her protector, her guardian angel, and Jack couldn't help but feel a deep gratitude for the horse who had never left her side. The ambulance sped off, its sirens cutting through the night. Jack stood there, watching it disappear into the distance, his heart still racing. They had made it, but there was still so much to be done. The truth had to come out. Daniel Hawkins had to pay for what he had done, and Snowy's role in saving Sophia couldn't be overlooked. As Jack turned to head back to the ranch, Snowy followed close behind. The horse had always been a constant presence in his life, but tonight Jack realized just how much that bond had deepened. Snowy wasn't just an animal to them anymore. He was family, and family meant everything. The night was quiet now, the storm beginning to subside, but Jack knew that the real storm was only just beginning. The truth would come to light, and justice would be served. But for now, he focused on one thing: getting Sophia the care she needed. And as long as Snowy was by her side, Jack knew she would be okay. The days following the rescue had been a blur of hospital visits, legal meetings, and preparations for what was about to unfold. Sophia, despite the trauma she had endured, had a quiet strength that amazed everyone around her. Her small body, fragile from the ordeal, was filled with a resilience that shone brighter than the brightest stars. But Jack Miller knew that the battle wasn't over yet. It was only beginning. Sophia had survived, and for that Jack was thankful beyond words. But the people who had caused her pain, her father, Daniel Hawkins, and his wife Amelia, still roamed free. Justice had yet to be served, and Jack wasn't about to let them get away with what they had done. The trial was set to begin. The courtroom, a place where justice was supposed to prevail, would be the battleground where Sophia's voice would be heard. It would be where the truth would come to light, and where Daniel Hawkins would face the consequences of his cruel actions. As the day of the trial drew closer, Sophia's anxiety grew. She had come a long way since that fateful morning, but the thought of reliving the events that nearly cost her life filled her with dread. Jack and Maria had been by her side every step of the way, but the thought of facing her father in court terrified her. She couldn't forget the cold look in his eyes when he had pushed her off the cliff. It was a look that haunted her every night. Maria, ever the calming influence, sat beside Sophia in her hospital room one evening as the moonlight filtered through the curtains. "Sweetheart, you don't have to worry. You don't have to face him alone," Maria said gently, brushing a strand of hair from Sophia's face. Sophia nodded, but the worry was still visible in her eyes. "I'm scared, Maria. What if they don't believe me? What if they let him go?" Maria smiled warmly, her voice filled with love and conviction. "They will believe you, Sophia. We have all the evidence, and we have Snowy. Don't forget that. Snowy was there. He never left your side." Sophia glanced out the window at the white horse grazing peacefully in the yard. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to her thoughts. Snowy had been her constant, her protector, her guardian angel. Without him, she wasn't sure she'd still be here. "I don't think I could have done it without Snowy," she whispered. Maria reached for Sophia's hand and held it tightly. "You are stronger than you think, Sophia. You have Snowy's love, and you have the love of Jack and me. We'll be there with you every step of the way. You're not alone." Sophia smiled weakly, feeling the warmth of Maria's words wrap around her like a comforting blanket. She had come to trust the Miller family like her own. Jack, Maria, and even their neighbors had shown her kindness when she had none. They had all come together, forming a new family for her, one built on love, respect, and loyalty. That night, as Sophia drifted off to sleep, Snowy remained just outside her window, his presence a silent guardian, watching over her as he always had. His loyalty, his love, his unwavering devotion, they all gave her strength when she needed it the most. The trial began on a crisp fall morning, the air heavy with anticipation. The courtroom was filled with people, reporters, family, and friends. On one side, Daniel Hawkins and Amelia sat in their expensive suits, their faces a mask of defiance. On the other, Jack, Maria, and Sophia took their seats, with Snowy waiting just outside the courthouse, as if to bear witness to what was about to happen. Sophia sat in her wheelchair, her eyes scanning the room, her fingers tightly gripping the armrests. Jack sat beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, a silent reassurance that she wasn't alone. He could feel her anxiety, her fear, and he wished he could take it all away, but he knew that today her voice would be heard. The prosecutor, a woman named Claire Turner, stood up and addressed the court. Her voice was firm, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we will hear the story of a young girl who was betrayed by the one person who should have loved her the most, her father. Daniel Hawkins, driven by greed and a lack of empathy, took a life-altering action that nearly cost this child her life. But she survived, and today she will tell you what happened." Sophia's heart raced as the prosecutor turned toward her. Claire motioned for her to speak, and all eyes turned to the young girl who had endured so much. Sophia hesitated for a moment. the weight of the moment pressing down on her. But then she remembered Snowy, his calming presence, and the strength she had found within herself. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I remember everything," Sophia began, her voice steady but soft. "I remember my daddy telling me we were going to watch the sunrise. I remember feeling scared because we were getting so close to the edge. I remember him saying that sometimes we have to make difficult decisions. I didn't know what he meant, but then he pushed me." Sophia paused, her throat tightening. "I screamed, but no one heard me. Except Snowy. Snowy heard me." Tears welled up in her eyes as she spoke, but she refused to let them fall. She had a story to tell, and nothing would stop her from telling it. "Snowy saved me. He watched over me. He never gave up on me. He never left me, even when I was scared. He's my hero." The room was silent, save for the soft sound of Sophia's voice. Her words rang with a truth that no one could ignore. Snowy's role in the rescue, his protective nature, his unwavering loyalty, it was undeniable. Daniel Hawkins shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room. He avoided Sophia's gaze, his face pale. Amelia sat beside him, her arms crossed tightly, her expression one of discomfort. Neither of them spoke, but their presence was a reminder of the cruelty they had tried to hide. The prosecutor continued, presenting the evidence: a recording of the 911 call, Jack's testimony, and the statements of the ranch workers who had witnessed Snowy's behavior. The facts were clear. Daniel Hawkins had pushed his daughter off a cliff in an attempt to rid himself of her. But Snowy had been the one to save her. Snowy had been the one to lead Jack to her. As the trial progressed, the weight of the evidence mounted. The defense struggled to counter the overwhelming proof of Daniel's actions, and it became clear that the truth was on Sophia's side. Daniel's world, once built on wealth and power, was crumbling before him. Finally, the moment arrived. The judge, a tall man with graying hair, looked down at Daniel and Amelia, his expression one of solemnity. "Daniel Hawkins, Amelia Hawkins, you are hereby found guilty of attempted murder, child abuse, and neglect. Your actions have caused irreparable harm to your daughter, Sophia Hawkins. For that, you will be held accountable." The room erupted in murmurs as the judge continued. "Sophia Hawkins will be placed in the care of Jack and Maria Miller, who have proven themselves to be her loving and capable guardians." Sophia's heart swelled with relief. The nightmare was over. Her father would no longer have control over her life, and she would finally be free to heal. As the bailiff escorted Daniel and Amelia out of the courtroom, Snowy whinnied loudly from outside, as if sensing the shift in the winds. Sophia smiled, tears streaming down her face, knowing that the fight was over. Snowy had won.